Welcome to the virtual lunch. Today is Friday, September 3rd, and this is virtual lunch number 379. I am so honored today that our guest is Ram Vasudevan, the founder and CEO of QuisLex, a provider of alternative legal services. And this is part of our September series on the future of law. Hi, Ram. Great to see you.
Hi, Ari. Good to see you again, and thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. So tell us about your background and the genesis of QuisLex.
I practiced law in New York before QuisLex. I was actually with Skadden in New York in their M&A group. And then I started QuisLex along with a few others 17 years ago. And at that time, I was a senior associate at Skadden. And the idea basically came about because in many of the large mid-market deals, I was handling diligence in the transaction. And I just thought, look, if I'm able to do it, I should be able to train really bright lawyers from worldwide, particularly from India, which is a common law background, and get this going. And that's how we got started. So I had 3 lawyers in India and we set up, and then we essentially built up some clients. We were lucky enough to have some clients trust us initially, and then it picked up from there. So initially, when I went to speak with clients or potential clients, the pitch was, I worked at Skadden. Some of us have worked with large law firms. We know how this is done, and we should be able to break down the complex services and then be able to provide solutions. Very quickly, we realized that it's not a literal translation of knowledge, but you really need consistency, process sophistication. So that was the first step. We started going after ISO certifications and standardizing a lot of what we did, both in litigation and corporate, etc. And then the next step, almost pretty quickly after that, is use of technology. We started incorporating all sorts of technology into our service solutions, whether it's in litigation or in corporate or compliance services. That's really how things grew from say when we started to how it's grown over the years. The objections generally center about, usually in anything, people object to things when you're not familiar with something, you tend to object to it because you're not sure about how it's going to work. So when we started off, particularly most of the solution was offshore based, the questions that would come up, they do sometimes now too, but not as much. Most often is, how do I know that what's being done is going to be the same quality as what I'm getting here? And secondly, how do I know that the solution is secure? So essentially, if you look at it, it's the quality of what service you're going to get and the security of how they're going to be delivered, which is no different from where you buy your services. Meaning, if you're buying your services from a law firm across the street, the same issue is there. So that was the 2 main issues initially. But then gradually over time, as we started getting more and more clients, we started winning awards, we started showcasing. I mean, for example, in recent times, in the last 6 years, we have won the ACC Value Champion Award 4 years in a row, each time with a different client, and each time in a different area, in litigation and compliance and contract management, etc. So there's a lot more history for clients and potential clients to see. And we have grown essentially by our reference network from clients. But the core remains, how do I get the top-notch work that I'm used to or I would like to get, irrespective of where it's being done or how it's being done. So your client success is very important for growing the confidence and the business with the client. So when you start working with a client, whoever it may be, in a service, and we are a tech-enabled service provider, you're only as good as your most recent transaction in terms of most recent what you do. So for the client to build that trust and to trust you with more work, particularly with things that are much further upstream, things that are of critical importance, the mission-critical litigations that we help several of our clients with, or the large M&A transactions, etc., they need to have confidence in what you do. So from that perspective, the client confidence is critical for you to grow. But for you to build that confidence in the market and to attract new clients and for others to see that, hey, there's a solution that I might want to consider or I might want to look at, the market acceptance and the awards and the recognition is important for that. Meaning it allows someone, it makes it easier for someone to become aware of that and to see if they could embark on the journey themselves. But for them to trust you with something that's critical, they need to develop that confidence. It's a 2-pronged thing, both equally important in slightly different ways. So we had to, in a relatively short span of time, transition a lot of projects in a secure manner in a distributed work environment in order to be able to support clients. For some of our highly sensitive projects, we did that with our clients because they were in the same conundrum as us. Previously, we would be working with them from their offices, so a lot of that had to happen. So it raised challenges, but everybody worked together. At least from our perspective, our clients were super cooperative and were able to implement solutions that worked. A lot of those practices still remain, but it certainly was a change. I don't think there's any business anywhere in the world that has survived the pandemic that has not gone through a change. Because if you've not been able to adapt, I don't think you'd have been in business. But in addition to security, it also raised a lot of process questions. How do you manage complex projects in a distributed work environment? How do you manage quality? How do you do sampling? There's just a lot of stuff that we needed to figure out as we went into this mode. We have traditionally grown with our clients, so we've always gone into newer areas. And the fact that it's changed how businesses approach solutions, right? Whether it's legal departments or the businesses, the scope of what we do, particularly are moving more upstream into work that traditionally might have been done only by a big four or only by the law firms. That's been hastened. We were already doing that, but in a few selected capacities where we had a really good relationship with the client, etc. But now we are seeing a lot more of that, where there's an increased collaboration between us and multiple law firms or some of the larger entities, where we are sort of program managing or working overall and providing that solutions. You always do things for the long term. It's never a short-term solution that works for the client, meaning you try not to take shortcuts. You look for what's going to work in the long term that's going to benefit your client the most in terms of doing that. And if you do that, I think invariably it works out. We have taken significant cuts in our revenue by recommending implementing strategies that we know that if we were going another way would have benefited us immensely to do the other thing. But you do the right thing for the client in terms of doing that, and over time it pays off. And that's why we are lucky in a sense. We have had several clients who have been with us for 14 years, 15 years. We have grown with our clients, but you get that by doing things for the long term. So the gender diversity, we have been focused on that from a very early point. Diversity is not just looking at what percentage are women and men, etc., but what we try to measure in addition to that, what percentage of our revenue is consistently brought in and or managed by women employees. That shows the level in terms of you're doing that. So for us, we've historically been 50 to 50+%. Actually, at this point, probably 55% of our revenue is either brought in or managed by women. And that's a pretty significant number. And that's something that we are very happy and proud about. So when we started the company, we were probably leadership heavy, right? Because many of us were doing the work and setting up the company as well. So as we grew, and several of our leaders actually have grown with the company. So particularly in operations, we have several folks who have been with us for 12 years, 13 years, 14 years. They're all in senior capacities, so because they understand the operations, they understand what we're doing, etc. It's happened gradually over time. But that being said, for specific skill sets, say when we're looking for technology or for process sophistication, something that we might not have on our own, so we have obviously gone out and hired in terms of bringing on board someone who has experience in that. But for us, it's a little different because it's happened gradually over time. So there's not been an instant, okay, let's go out and add 5 people from a senior level in this in terms of doing that, because it's been driven by operations in terms of our growth. The litigation is something that you'll continue to see because there's a lot of obviously consolidation in that. But also, if you look at the managed services, both in terms of how the services are being delivered with law firms, there's enormous scope for optimization and growth and improvement in those areas. You will see a lot of consolidation where different services may be provided by e-discovery providers, ALSPs, law firms. You'll see much more of an integrated approach. You will see that in the litigation space. If you look at culture for a company, right, it's never static. It's dynamic. It evolves. It changes. And a lot of it is by actual behavior that you see, but a lot of it is by cues that you see in the office when you work with someone senior, when you work with someone junior. We human beings, we are remarkably good at mimicking and adapting, right? So we look at it, we take cues from others and we do that. That part of it is certainly affected because while I can take cues from you on Zoom, it's not the same as meeting someone in terms of doing that. By no means am I saying that without that, you cannot, but I think you need to have some sort of an hybrid. So in terms of building the company culture that has remained, the culture that has grown for a few years, you can continue on in a remote setup. You can still continue on because you have people with that history, with that knowledge. But for several of the people who have joined, whether it's QuisLex or any of the other companies here in the last 18 months, it's going to be difficult to inculcate the same fervor that you would have for your colleagues and for the company without the social meetings and the informal meetings that you had before. I'm not saying it's not possible to do that. It's going to be difficult and perhaps a little different to do that.
Ram Vasudevan, everybody. Fantastic discussion.
Thanks,
Thank you so much for sharing these perspectives. And thanks to QuisLex for supporting our September series on the future of law. I hope everyone has a great weekend.